Hello, and welcome to the Elevated Frequency Podcast. My name is Shannon Morse, and I'm here with my lovely co-founder and business wife, Lisa Debbie.
Hello. Episode 26. Wow.
Yeah, we're getting some reps in here.
I know, we're cruising. We're
We
cruising
are.
now.
I know. And we have so many things to talk about all the time.
Shocking.
Absolutely. So today, you guys, for those of you who are able to listen now or in sometime in the future, we are going to be discussing the impact of instant gratification and the whole hustle culture on women specifically. And this is for you if you feel like you have this all or nothing mindset that comes in, if you have this mindset of perfectionism, if you have this mindset of if you can't get it right, then you're not going to do it at all. If you have this tendency to push through to where your body gives you these signs and signals of perhaps getting injured or perhaps getting sick frequently, or perhaps not getting enough sleep and really kind of feeling like you are just operating at a stress to the max scenario. So we are going to be talking about this today because it's something that we see so frequently with our new members, and then kind of discuss some strategies around this. Like, if this is you, what's happening in your body, both from like a mental and emotional perspective, but also like a physiological perspective with your hormones and the impact that this kind of culture causes on so many layers of our being. So, Lise, I don't even know where we want to start.
I know, it's big, but it's becoming more and more apparent now, and I think it really is tying into everything that we're seeing in terms of our female clients in particular and the challenges that they're facing in their physical bodies. That is really just this like culmination and manifestation of years of pushing through. It's like years of that being in that stress state, and just like right off the bat, women are really not built physiologically to do. We're literally not built to hold as much stress and pressure as men. And I think this kind of narrative that we've bought into is like, you can do it all, like go to college, be a mom, work, like make tons of money, like blah, 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 be like the best Pinterest mom ever, and like this. Or like maybe you're not a mom and you're like caring for, like you, Shannon, like caring for like thousands of people and holding space for like thousands of children in many ways, or caring for parents. Everyone has these different situations. And what I really feel like you and I are both seeing on this like very like, macro scale is like, what is the impact of that when you get to your 40s? How's that working out for us as a collective? I don't think it's working out very well. And it's, I think what's hard is, not only the way, like when we think about like the US and kind of the whole entire vibe of the US, of the way it was created and started, was like, if you work hard enough, you can be successful too. Like it was no longer about, oh, you're born into this track and you have to stay there. And so that kind of like, yes, like go for it, hustle, blah, blah, blah. Like that works really well for men. And in fact, like they need that challenge. They need that drive. They need that push. But for women, it's not the same thing. Like it doesn't, like doing that long term especially is detrimental to our physical health.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And what I've noticed, like just maybe in the last like 4 years, as we've had like the pandemic and we've had these huge pendulum swings of feeling what it feels like on a collective and individual level to stop everything and then to slowly add some things back in, and kind of being able to have this such stark contrast that like we were going, all of us, especially in the US, we're just going. We didn't know where we were going. We were just going. And then everything stopped. And I think some of us were like, thank God. I'm so like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know what was going on at that time in my life. I was just doing the thing and I didn't stop. And what I think this opportunity now is we're moving into these different portions of the pendulum swing is to give ourselves this opportunity to actually deeply listen. And that's what's missing, right? That's what's missing when we're just focusing on the hustle culture or the perfectionist or am I doing this right? We aren't actually giving ourselves the opportunity to go, hey, do I like this? Hey, does this feel good for me? Hey, does this bring me joy? You know? And what I've been noticing lately is the different ways in which women will get oxytocin versus men getting oxytocin, right?
Yeah.
And yesterday, funniest thing, just the true story. I am about to start my cycle, and I had an hour free yesterday, and I spoke to one of our coaches for the hour and spent an hour window shopping. All I wanted to do was look at stuff and smell it. That was
Nice.
all I wanted to do, and it felt so satisfying. So my body likes to produce oxytocin with just browsing.
Yeah.
I don't need to buy anything. I just like to browse. But for men, sports will have that effect. If I sit next to Rafa and we're watching a game, which really never happens because my body starts producing cortisol. I'm like, I can't handle this. It's not calming to me. It causes me anxiety.
Yeah.
So from what you're sharing, Lise, it's like there's just been this really kind of mismatch of how we're supposed to be operating in the world as females. And it has removed, and as males, right? Because males are experiencing this in their way as well. But it's removed this opportunity to kind of ask ourselves, like, what do I actually want? And what do I actually feel like doing? Or how does this food actually feel in my body? Or does my body actually want to be doing this type of training right now? Or does this music really feel good in my system? Or just so many things like we just have forgot to listen, or we've never been taught to listen in the first place.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And when you really think about like the physiology of like how men are wired versus women, their kind of driver neurotransmitter is dopamine.
Mm,
And that is the one that's like the motivator, it's the hunter, it's the get out and do do things. For women, like our driver is oxytocin.
mm,
So that is the connector, the love neurotransmitter, the caring neurotransmitter. What I like theorize about often is like women have been pushing ourselves in this dopamine driven world, and it's not to say like we can't be ambitious, like look at us
yeah. Right.
and what we've created. But here's the caveat. Like this is what I think about a lot when I think back to previous like corporate jobs I've had. Those were not safe places for a woman.
Mm,
Those were places where I walked in every day and I was like, I might get fired. Like, I don't know. Or, I need to work so hard above and beyond because there's a fear here that, maybe I won't be able to retain my job or I'm not doing enough.
mm,
What you and I have been able to cultivate and why I will never go back to like that situation is being able to like as two women like
mhm,
being able to like do the business side, like the more masculine things that we have to do in our business, but also cultivate this safe space where we can have like share our emotions and be like, hey, like these are our triggers and like
mm,
work through like sticky, tough times without this fear of repercussion. Right. And so it creates this safety. And that's like that needs to be there for women, that
mm.
oxytocin driver needs to be there for women, and it just shows up in everything we do. We're service oriented. It just makes so much sense. So my theory is like when you push women or convince women that we need to be operating like men,
Mhm,
working on the same schedule, which doesn't work for us 2 weeks out of every month,
mhm,
just doesn't jive with how we're wired. And then we keep pushing, pushing, pushing. The female body's going to respond, and a lot of times it responds with holding on to weight,
mm,
and it's like a defense mechanism of from that high cortisol release. Like we're not meant to be in that high cortisol state 24/7, and the body's just like, okay, we're going to hang on to everything,
mhm.
and we're going to create more fat tissue because we're going to keep the toxins away from your organs. Like it's a protective mechanism. And
Yep.
so it's really multi-layered when you think about the work that we do, and we're so blessed to do this work. And why we were talking the other day of like, how do we better clarify like what our program is and our role as nutrition coaches, because we're unpacking these deeper things like this. So for you, Shan, what do you feel like is when you see kind of these patterns of like very driven women,
Mm.
um, with that kind of all or nothing, like hustle culture, like very push mentality, want quick results? Like, what is your approach for helping to soften that and like kind of change that perspective?
Mm. Such a good question. Well, what's happening right now is I'm actually seeing two different archetypes of the push through or the all or nothing.
Yeah.
And one archetype is like they will almost be blind. They will be blind to how their body feels, because if they tuned into that, it may be contradictory to what they're being told they should be doing. And I think there's this aspect of fear of, well, I don't want to go against what I think I should be doing. So I'm going to completely shut off this internal knowing.
Mm.
And so with that, it's almost like follow through to a fault,
Mm.
like following someone off a cliff if they asked you to. So not having that deeper, like, well, actually, that didn't feel good and why? And kind of working to understand that. And I think the very nuanced aspect of what it is that we do with the coaching and the green door life and all of it is that there is a massive difference between what our logical brain is saying through conditioned ideas of the past
Mhm.
and what our actual physiology is saying. And sometimes our conditioning can actually cause further stress, right? So us being able to do something or not do something can cause us further stress based on our past experiences, because that pathway is already written. So I'm finding with this archetype where it is totally forgetting to listen, it's just opening up the conversation. So it's like, well, let's actually look at it and kind of go, how does that feel in your body? And really just opening up the question, right?
Yeah.
Does your
Yeah.
body like that? Like, what did you notice? And just kind of tuning in a little bit more in that way. So that's one.
Yeah.
And then kind of seeing what comes up there, because that's usually a thread that you'll start to pull, and all of a sudden it like unravels this whole ball of yarn, and you're like, wow, what do you know? And then the other is this kind of I almost want to say that the other one is like a kite. It's like a personality that is a kite that is really just going with wherever the wind wants to blow them. They have
Mm.
big lofty goals. They are also quite like they're quite powerful in their line of work, whatever that is, but they're a little listless, and
Mm.
they might kind of have this more of like swing from one to the next, and they're not really sure why. And for those individuals, what I actually find is they need something that's going to be their foundation and anchor. And they don't have a foundation and anchor. They almost resist the foundation and anchor because they think that it's going to prevent them from having freedom.
Mm.
And so, what they don't realize, or they haven't been able to have the opportunity to experience yet, because I think it really can't be a logical experience. I think it's got to be a felt, um, tangible, like lived experience, is that when they have a consistent structure that's built in, it's actually going to allow them to have even more freedom. And the only way to figure that out is to have a trust fall and to put the consistency into place first. Because then when we have that consistency, it allows us to notice all of those signs and signals that we have been ignoring, or that have been mixed signals because we've been so busy with everything else in our life and pushing through and going through the all or nothing. Like we get sick multiple times a year. I wonder why that is. We're getting injured constantly. I wonder why that is. And just kind of going like, oh, it just must be me.
Right.
But actually looking at it and going like, well, let's kind of take a step back and go, maybe it's not just you. Maybe it's what you're choosing to do or not do. And maybe your body already knows what's right for you. You just haven't given yourself the space to listen yet.
Right. So it's not like this predetermined destiny. It's like, well, maybe it's, yeah, I think you're spot on. It's like we like to make our problems like very isolated. Like no one else in the entire world is experiencing this. And then we get all these female clients, and we work with men too, obviously. Everyone knows that. But when you get everyone together in this group, and then you're like, wait, me too. Like I feel that too. Oh my gosh, me too. And it not only makes you feel less alone, but there's so much like healing and growth in that shared experience of
Mhm.
it's not just me, and you have the tools and power to feel better. So
Mhm.
what I'm hearing is like really like the one side of women who and men, but we're talking about women right now,
Mhm.
who are so structured and have like lived by that structure, where maybe they need more help with like the intuitive
Yes.
aspect of like listening in, a little more flexibility. And then there's the other one, like the kite. I see the kite like blowing in the wind. That's like we need a little more structure there,
Mhm.
and awareness, like bringing into, so you're not just kind of flowing around like happenstance, like my life's happening to me. It's
Mhm.
almost like this one is like controlling all the things that just needs to soften, and then this side
Mhm.
is like needs to get a little bit more structure, so that in both instances, it's like awareness has entered the chat. That's like popped up in my head today. I'm like, all right, new t-shirt. Awareness has entered the chat in both instances.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Yeah, it's the listening, and I mean, to be honest, there's so many ways in which we just completely rush by so many things, and I am absolutely at fault for this.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think it's just a natural component with the way in which our world is right now. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been noticing how often I will grab for my phone when there's no need. And so that's just this repetitive action that's occurring. And so I have to consciously and with awareness build a structure that allows for me then to just check it at certain intervals because it's part of a structure, not because it's an unconscious behavior. And I think that's the bigger thing is making the unconscious conscious. It's like that's the shadow work. That's what we're doing to really understand new behavior opportunities that are available for us. But I think what we're finding with the women in the whole hustle culture is that more often than not, women are coming and they have a prefixed unconscious relationship with performance,
Mm.
whether it's a perfectionistic capacity or whether it's the all or nothing, the right or wrong, the should or shouldn'ts. And again, we can put these in all of these categories, but it feels like what's ultimately missing is actually asking ourselves, is this nourishing for me? Does my body like this? Does this feel recharging? Does it feel draining? And doing that with all aspects of our life. And Lise, like you and I have talked about so many times, sometimes a person in your life can feel recharging.
Mhm.
Other times they can feel draining.
Right.
So there's also like a cyclical nature and a seasonality and a time and place for everything. And if we get so in tune with ourselves, we're going to have a much better understanding and capacity to go, oh, you know what I really feel like my body's asking for right now is being with a bunch of girls and just talking about who the hell knows what we're going to talk about. Just being with a bunch of women. That's what my body's asking for. And for men, it could be, you know what? I just need to go to the shooting range. Like that really lights, I don't know why, but that's what my body's asking for. And the more that we have these little buckets that we can choose from, and the more we give ourselves the opportunity to try things out and go like, huh, did I like that? Like, what did that provide for me? Was that like intellectually stimulating or emotionally stimulating? Instead of just pushing through and unconsciously going through all of these things. So at least for you, I love this because I've watched you and you've gone through like your own journey of going through the corporate world and really being in the hustle culture, especially with the way in which you would work. And you and I have both done this together. Like you guys, some of the stuff that we've created, we've like done, I don't know, 3 to 4 sleepless, or maybe not sleepless, but we didn't get a ton of sleep the first time we did our course. And
Oh yeah.
it was fun, but maybe not the most balanced. But as you've gone through kind of watching yourself move through a corporate setting and having a certain mindset around training
Mm.
and food, what have you noticed like within your body, within your mindset that's kind of unfolded as you've gone through it?
Yeah, I would say, definitely in my 20s, I could easily push through, no problem. I laugh thinking back now. We actually talked about this one time, Shan, of just like sharing like old work stories and stuff. I'm like, I remember the days like working at a startup when we literally would work till 2 in the morning, and then my boss would drive me home, and then I would literally take a hour and a half nap, and she would come get me, sometime between 4 and 5. And we had this massive like investor meeting the next day. And I didn't know any better. It was my first job. I was like, oh, like this is the way it goes. I remember texting my dad like within the first week of working there. And I was like, Dad, is this like life? Like, is this like what it's supposed to be? And I was sobbing every night I came home. I was like, this is like truly the worst thing ever. Like everything in my body said no, right?
Mhm.
And my dad was like, yeah, like that's the way it is. And like you're 25 now. Like it's basically he was like, it's time to like you're on your own, you're making your own money. And as a woman, now, like thinking back now, like physiologically, I had to push through because
Mm.
there is no safety container. And this is where, it can get very philosophical and deep, but that's when I started not listening to my body. My
Mhm.
body was screaming at me. I was more sick in that first year of my corporate job than I've ever been sick in my entire life.
Mm.
I had like 3 surgeries. Like my
Wow.
body was screaming at me. And what are the options? Move back home? Like how do you sustain as a single female,
Mhm. Yeah.
and these are the things that I think we really need to start talking about, because if we don't talk about it and we just shove it down and we just push through, you get to your 30s, you get to your 40s, and your body's breaking down and you don't know why.
Mhm.
And so for me, it has just been this incredible like unlearning and unraveling of everything I had to do for 20 years just to survive.
Mm.
To first survive as a single female, like
Mhm.
supporting myself, and then moving into supporting my family,
Mm.
and having young children and carrying that weight with me.
Mhm.
It all was survival mode. And so I've shared this story before, but the power of having a guide and a coach, and again, this is what cracks me up when it's like we're nutrition coaches, but not, it's so much more, because
Yeah.
just you asking me once a week, like, how are you? Like, how are you? And like, how's your body feeling? And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Because when you're in that survival mode, you're really hyper focused on time, your
Mm.
environment, and your body. That's it.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
tunnel vision. You can't hear fully. You're not aware. You're everything constricts, right? And
Mm.
so that evolution for me is what helped me leave the corporate world forever, which, not ironically, several of our clients end up changing jobs after finishing our 12-week program because they're realizing the source of some of these deep stressors and high cortisol is tied into where we pushing ourselves too far and
Mm.
not listening and not getting that rest and nourishment that we need.
Mhm.
So just in a fairly short amount of time, like 5, 6 years, I've been able to, little by little unpack, unlearn. And again, it's not about, you know, Shannon and I are, you and I are very ambitious, like driven
Yeah.
women with hardcore work ethics. So it's not about not doing. It's almost like just remembering to add in the other side of that of like, hey, when we have a really hard push, we're going to have a really hard rest.
Yep. Right. We're working with the cyclical nature. Yeah. And I love hearing your story, Lise, because I hope people who are listening can kind of resonate with what their own experience is with that. Because in any sort of moment where I've just not been paying attention, I've just been pushing through. when I think back on it, I'm like, I know my body didn't like it. You
Yeah.
know, I was just in the place where I was unconsciously doing the thing because I thought that I was supposed to be doing the thing. And then now in this practice, and especially with understanding more of our hormonal cycles, kind of listening just more deeply, being in an environment that cultivates deeper listening, right? Not having like a ton of distractions that are around all the time and having a little bit more quiet, which our house now just feels incredibly quiet. It feels, and not to say that this is possible for everyone because it's not, and I understand that, but even moving into places like India where it's never quiet, you know, there's a way in which now I'm very hyper aware that from a general day-to-day basis, my highest performing output will be first thing in the morning for my brain. I know that. And so first thing in the morning, I'm almost like excited to get in and do my high performing output of my brain. If I try to put that stuff at night, I get frustrated. I
Yeah.
get frustrated. I don't feel like I'm saying the right thing. And it just kind of compounds on itself. But I know that about my system. And if I didn't know that, then I might judge myself and compare myself to somebody else.
Yeah.
Or I might go, well, I'm just going to do it anyways. And like whatever that is must be like a mental conversation that I'm having. I'm just going to ignore it. Or what if I actually work with what my body's telling me and create a structure around it that allows me to fully show up when those moments arise? Like I know I have my best workouts in the early afternoon. So if I know that my best brain power is in the morning, my workouts like to be in the afternoon, and then I can come in and kind of do like softer focus work after the gym because I know I'll have a little bit more energy and mental clarity from the blood flow and oxygen from training. Then I can really work with the natural cycles of my body and then know when to shut it down, or else I know I'm going to be a little bit more on edge. And when we know those natural rhythms of our body, and when we're actually just giving the opportunity to ourselves or being given the opportunity from having like a coach that asks, then we're going to have this capacity to reinvent how we work with our own cycles. And that is a whole game changer.
Yeah, it's like working with how you're physiologically designed versus pushing through. So basically, we should be consultants to companies and corporations, like, because this is the truth, is women bring something so unique to the table, to any company, to a family, to, you know, any kind of collective, whatever group. And it's not like we need to be there. We need to have a seat at the table, but it needs to flow and work with us. And it's like we need to, I think that's this whole reassessment. This is what phase we're in now, you know, as a society. We're like looking at all these things that we've created in the past 200 years and we're like, is this working? No, it's not. It absolutely is not. And it's like, what can we get creative and think outside the box to really support, you know, women in particular to move through those flow states? I mean, when I think now of like companies and health benefits and all that stuff, I'm like, you know, no one needs another like willy-nilly like fitness app. Like I think back to these little perks that we got, you know, working at these companies, and I was like, that was just so not helpful, and it was such a waste of money. Like if you really want to support your employees, like give them a freaking hour to go train. They're going to come back and be so much more grateful and have so much more energy and so much more productivity, which reminds me of a story. I remember, like, again, first getting in the corporate world, and I've always been a little bit of a rebel, like shocking. But I would, you know, I learned really quickly in sitting all day. I was like, okay, this is obviously not good. It doesn't feel good, right? So I was spearheading this campaign. And when I think back now, I'm like, oh, this was pretty aggressive, because here I am, this like in my early 20s, like brand new to the corporate world. And I started going to the gym on my lunch breaks. And once my supervisor found out that I was doing that, she would then use that to say, "Oh, today is not a gym day." And I was like, well, Susie over here is taking a 1 hour lunch break every day. I'm just spending my 1 hour lunch break at the gym.
Mhm.
So I am absolutely going to be taking my 1 hour lunch break at the gym. That is my choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that ruffled feathers and was like, used against me. But that's where I have never been scared to like think outside the box and advocate for myself, even when it felt, scary and risky, because I'm like we need to speak up about this, right?
Yes.
So it's really looking at, can we be it's creating this culture of flexibility, because people really now, it's not that people are lazy or don't want to work. Like people that I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. I think
Mm.
people are like, hey, this lifestyle sucks. And I'm not
Mhm.
going to sit, in this space in whatever 9 to 5 or whatever other hustle culture thing going on. And then get to my 40s and feel like crap and hang everything on this like possible retirement and then feel terrible, and then that's how my life
Oh my gosh.
ends. Like, no thank you. We're like, no, that's not going to work.
And most people don't even think about that. In my experience, until they get to 40 and they're like, wait, what have I been doing? And what does this all mean? And how is this working for me? Or that's
Yeah.
really wild, Lisa, that you had that experience. And for those of you who are business owners or you run companies or you're part of the development team for companies or CEOs, whatever that might be. If you don't know this already, when we do any sort of activity, it actually increases our reading comprehension. So I would actually purposely place training before I would take a test because I knew that it would have that benefit. And so same thing, like when you and I do like some sort of workshop, please, I'll do some sort of activity prior because I know I'm going to be sharper and clearer for that. And if corporations knew this about energy systems and performance and what actually fuels performance, they could actually really help their employees to perform in a much better way overall, and of course reduce their overall cost of sick days and things like that, which is just like a given. um, but it's really kind of just this wild thing when we look at the general corporate structure. I mean, thank goodness that we had the pandemic in some capacity because it allowed for most people to do a half work from home and half work from office now, which both gives them a balance perhaps of doing what they need to do at home with their family, whatever that might look like, maybe getting in some more training time because they don't have to commute as far, and then also having the social interaction if they are in an office. And that balance really feels like it's a good blend. But if your job, whatever that might be, doesn't have that balance, then it requires you to kind of infiltrate and move into seeing what you can bring in as a balance. And that's going to look a little bit different for everybody. And I think, as we always say, Lise, is like, it doesn't have to be an hour to make a difference. It can be 10 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. It can be something. It can just be taking a few nice deep breaths, like whatever feels recharging or nourishing, or just taking a moment to ask yourself, what do I need right now? As we're in this conversation, what's going to kind of take this edge off if there is anything that I can do for my system? There was something that you were saying, and I mean, there's just so many directions that we can go with this, and it's pretty fascinating. But I'm wondering, like, I'm curious because we have all of these different types of companies right now, and especially the people that we work with. We've got nurses, we've got coaches in their own capacity. We have people who are in tech. We've had lots of individuals from Netflix and Facebook and Planned Parenthood and like all of these different spectrums of our workforce, police officers, and just everyone is going to have a little bit of a different relationship with what is being asked of them in terms of how they show up. But I think it all kind of comes back to how we listen and nourish ourselves. And if we're just like banging our head against the wall and being in that fight or flight state, then we're never really going to have the opportunity to listen, because we're going to be so like overwhelmed with just trying to survive the current experience. And that is
Absolutely.
the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like when you think about it hormonally, when I learned this piece of information, I was like, "Oh dang, this makes so much sense." So like every morning, you have this master hormone, pregnenolone, and pregnenolone can really go to support like producing more sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, depending on male versus female, or it can help produce cortisol. So I truly believe what we've created and this atmosphere of just living in this high, where it's like we're addicted to cortisol.
Hmm.
So we have this, the body really has this choice of like where to push this master hormone. And if you're always in that kind of stress state and you're always pushing through, your body's going to choose cortisol. This is
Mm.
why we have so much hormonal imbalance. This is why men have low T. This is why women are experiencing horrible, PMS issues, like growing up and then going straight into like horrible perimenopause symptoms and then experiencing that at a younger and younger age. It's really because we're pushing this pregnenolone into cortisol to make more cortisol. And it's not to say we don't want to vilify cortisol. If we didn't have cortisol, we wouldn't get our asses out of bed and do anything, right? So it's
Mhm.
not about good or bad, it's balance. It's
Mhm.
the body being in homeostasis. So just knowing that is it's such a powerful thing to really look at in your life. Where are the stressors that are pushing you into that overflow or overwhelm, and
Mhm.
where can you kind of dial it back down. um, I think for a lot of people, Shan, we don't realize that we're in a very chronic stress state. I know we've asked some of our clients, like, you know from the outside, it feels very clear, like, it seems like you have a lot on your plate right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, but when you ask the person, like, when we ask some of our clients, do you like, how stressed do you feel? What's coming up for you this week? And it's like it's almost like there's nothing there. Like they're like, I don't know, this is just my life. I know
Mhm.
for me, Shan, when we first moved out of California in 2016, and y'all, shout out North Carolina. I actually love it because then I stopped saying you guys. But when we moved from California to this very small little suburb in North Carolina, like not even in Charlotte or um, Raleigh, like very small, my whole nervous system, like it took me a year to relax.
Mm.
I had no idea how hyper vigilant and what in a stress state I was living every day until I
Mhm.
got to North Carolina. It was like day 1 or 2. We're driving on the main road, country road, and there's a tractor in front of us on the main road. What are you going to do? You can't go around it. We're going 20 miles per hour on this sweet little country road. I could feel my body like I had nowhere to go. I wasn't even in a rush. It was like a Saturday and I could just feel the anxiety creep up. It was like I
Mm.
was so full of cortisol. It was
Mm.
stressing me out. Or I'd go to the grocery store and the cashier's just chatting. And I could just feel the anxiety again for no reason. I'm like, who is this person talking my ear off? I don't even know this person. Like, people in California barely even say hi, at least in my experience at the time. And it was like a year of just like, wow, this is a slower pace of life.
Mm.
And really
Mhm.
slowing down, it allowed my nervous system to just relax just a little bit. It was kind of the beginning of that, like, whoa, just bring
Mm.
it down a notch or 10. And then that opened up those moments of being able to check in and be like, wow, I was or am really stressed.
Yes.
Did you
Yeah.
find that at all when you guys moved to Tennessee?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember Rafa went back to SF for like a work trip. And I asked him before he left, I was like, can you just kind of check in with yourself and let me know the difference that you feel when you're there versus here? And I loved his response when he came back. He was like, In California, it feels like you will never have enough. And in Tennessee, it feels like it's enough. And that just like takes everything down like 10 notches.
Yeah.
Where there's not this whole like, oh, I got to do more and faster and harder and longer and like all of this thing. But what's kind of funny is that I'll look at how people drive in different states and kind of get a sense of like I couldn't really understand what was happening in Nashville. But in San Francisco and the Bay Area, I mean, people are kind of dicks when they're driving. Like people cut you off and they like to use the bird and like honking but at the same time, everyone's pretty organized. I feel like when they're driving, you'll have your like random Prius, sorry.
Going like 30 on the freeway.
Yes, but somehow in Tennessee, and this is kind of off topic, but it's just hilarious. We would get on the freeway and sometimes I'm like, who is everyone running from? Because everyone gets on the freeway and all of a sudden it's like they're in a car chase and they're weaving in and out and everyone's weaving in and out. And I'm like, what is happening? Okay. And then you get to like some sort of like Chick-fil-A and everyone's pretty calm. And I'm not really sure what's going on here.
Okay. Chanley has a theory about that because that was the only fast-paced thing when we moved to North Carolina. We were like, what? Like everyone's so chill, but on the freeways, it's like NASCAR. And he was like, oh, honey, like you don't get it. This is like NASCAR, IndyCar, Nation, like racing cars. I'm like, oh, okay. So they're not like, that's normal. Like that's the only thing that goes fast is like the cars and the speeding, but everything else is like, because they get out of the car and they're like, they'll have like an hour conversation with you. Like they really weren't in a rush. I promise.
Right. Oh my gosh. Total side tangent, but I'm glad we're talking about this. It's just myths.
So good.
So as we move back into the conversation about hustle culture, I think the big thing that I want to really point to, because it's, two things. One is the sense of guilt and shame that individuals will have sometimes when they aren't doing what they perceive as being enough or right or things like that. So that thing I definitely want to make sure that we touch on. And then the second is to like how to slowly make some adjustments, like really, really easy things that can be done if you are listening to this and you're identifying with it and going, oh man, that's absolutely what I'm experiencing. That's me, et cetera, et cetera. And for those of you who might be on the fence and you're kind of like, well, I don't know if I'm experiencing that or not. Here are some things that I'm identifying with individuals who are like that. And Lisa, I would love to hear if you want to, like what you would add to this list as well. Because I think sometimes it's helpful to have kind of like identification factors,
Yeah.
So for those individuals who I feel like, for females specifically right now in this conversation, who are really moving at that like instant gratification, hustle culture, this whole thing, and they're really moving into the all or nothing, perfectionist mentality, et cetera, et cetera. What I find is that they will usually have incredibly packed schedules. So they'll have very, very little time to like maybe read a chapter, or maybe go for a walk, or maybe have a phone call with their friend. I don't know. Like there just doesn't seem to be a lot of moments for connection, whether it's with someone else or with themselves. It's almost like everything is just filled up. So that's one that I can identify. The other is that there will be this heightened sense of follow through without really asking questions. They'll just be except the questions will be more so, am I doing this right? Or are these numbers where they should be? And it's kind of like hyper focused on the right or wrong aspect. The other one is individuals that just kind of disappear off the face of the planet. Where whether it's like you're identifying this as yourself, where it's like if you can't do the things that you would perceive to be the right way, that you just absolutely disappear. your boss doesn't hear from you. You don't hear from your friends. Like, you don't call your friends. You don't talk to people close to you in your life. You just kind of like go, oh, if I can't do it right, I'm just going to hide.
Yes.
So anything else that you would add to that? Like,
Oh, I think it's so spot on. It's like the ones who will just like go deeper and do more, and then you know, on the other end of the spectrum is like ghosting, but at the heart of it is the same, you know, concern that you're talking about internally of like not doing it right.
mm,
I think what's interesting, we see it reflected. It's really, really interesting. Like we see our clients, our new clients, and I was one of them,
mhm,
project onto our program something that it isn't. So,
mhm,
and part of it is because nutrition coaching is new. It's new-ish. It's still you know, in its baby evolution. And again, we do so much more than that. We're gonna have to come up with a new word, a
yeah.
new word for what we do. But you know, when I met you, I was like, I couldn't even like, I had no idea what you were going to teach me, you know, because I had already spent decades trying to figure out food on my own. So I was like, I
Mhm,
expected this was going to be another diet, and I hated dieting. And I was like, what am I even doing? And I went into
mhm,
it with the intention of like, oh, I'm going to be a nutrition coach. I better, like, what did I just walk myself into? I actually hate dieting. I hate restricting. Um, and, you know, that was my assumption and expectation. And so I automatically had all these judgments about what you were going to teach me and what this program was. And, you know, I essentially put it in this bucket of like diet culture, and that it was,
mhm,
you know, I felt like this guilt and shame, like, I know better. You know, I watched my mom growing up, I watched my mom go through and suffer at the hand of diet culture, and was always on a diet and always eating different than what we were eating, like to an extreme. And so I just assumed that that's what this was, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. And then again, it was like 2 or 3 days into it, and you would just be like, well, you know, where's that coming from? Because that's not, I didn't say anything, you know, you were like, I didn't say anything about that. Like, this has nothing
mhm,
to do with restricting these. This is like education, and everything's a
mhm,
choice, and it's about noticing how your body feels. And
mhm,
that was so mind blowing for me. And I think, you know, for a lot of people who don't know what we do in particular, is it's easy to project on us like, oh, they're just this like toxic diet culture, you know, anything to do with like tracking your food is automatically a negative, when in fact for me and so many clients it was like so healing. It was so
mhm,
healing, and then like brought, like, infused in this layer of awareness into my life that was non-existent. Then I
mhm,
started, that's the thread, right? So then I'm like, well, why am I eating this way? Does it even feel good? Why am I
mhm,
training this way? Like, I was just blindly doing random ass workouts as hard as I could every single time, max weight, 1 rep max, like literally like 7 days a week, you know? And then it's, you start to unpack like, but why? Like, why am
mhm.
I doing this? So, um, I think that aspect is so interesting. If you can, again, that benefit of having a guide and a mentor to like help you, you know, just like it's a little poke of
Yeah,
awareness.
absolutely. There's so many threads that I could go in with that. But kind of, I hope for those of you who are listening that you were able to kind of identify if this is you, because the reason why I'm sharing, or why we're sharing even like this identification process, is that sometimes if you're in fight or flight, you don't know.
Yeah.
And so these are some of the symptoms that you might have. And you know, we're covering kind of like a lot of different topics here, from like corporate wellness and kind of like your schedule to how we might disappear or overcompensate when we're faced with something that feels like we need to do it a certain way. And so we're kind of covering a full spectrum, but it all has to do with when we are so in our unconscious behavior patterns and they're not conscious yet. And so just as what you're sharing, Lise, and asking, well, why am I doing this? Like, just that question is so powerful,
Yeah.
because that just moves back into intentionality. And there's so many women, and this is another conversation for us to do, probably our next one, is there idea of what they need to do in terms of training and how training should look for them is the epitome of push through.
Yes.
It's got to be like so difficult for it to be effective. They
Yeah.
have to be dying and sweating and out of breath, and they're going to be super hungry later. And then somehow in their brain, they think, oh, that's a good thing. My body should be more hungry, but then I'm gaining more weight. And so what's up with that? And wait, how does this work exactly? And I feel like these are the classes I should be doing. So there's like this whole thing there. But even that component, that's something in our brain, because you and I were both those people
Yeah.
where, and I probably shared this story before, but you guys, my workouts before were ridiculous. And I remember my colleague at the time, JJ, if JJ ever listens to this, he would like watch me do the workouts and not say anything. And then finally, when I was training with him, he would just be like, yo, you got to stop doing that. You got to stop working out without taking any breaks for an hour, you know? And I
Hey,
was,
amen. Because it's like, I look back, I've had the honor of training with like amazing trainers who train professional athletes. And I was out there, I would be doing like heavy barbell front squats, like max reps. And then they're like, on the programming, it's like 2 minute and 30-second rest. And I'd be like, yeah, cool, got it. Burpees and like banded squat walks. Like I could not let my body, I'm like,
mm-hmm,
rest.
mm-hmm,
There's no rest. Like, what? Like, I'm not going to listen to that. And again, it's bringing that awareness. Like, why does your trainer have that rest program? You might want to ask your trainer if they haven't told you already. Or are you that notorious client who's like, rest 20, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and then you're off like doing cardio in the background or jump squats? It's like, okay, well, now you've just compromised your next set. And now you are
yes.
literally, you're not going to be able to solicit the same muscle contraction. So it
Run
is,
on fumes.
it's like this, it is, we are so in that mindset. We've really, at least, speaking for the majority of us, we've really been raised in that mindset of just like push, push, push. And
Mhm.
again, we're just seeing the more detrimental impact of that on women, but also men.
Mhm.
People
Oh, yeah.
really, it's like burnout state. I think what doesn't
Mhm.
help either, Shan, is like when I think about how much technology has transformed just in the last like 20 years, even 10 years. It's really doing something to the brain. And
Mm.
I
Mhm.
really, like you're saying, it's harder now. Like you have to set up structure and boundaries for like technology from, watching Netflix and whatever other streaming to your phone. It's like harder to like not engage
Mhm.
in those things. So we really try to do like dopamine detoxes here because it
Mm.
literally changes your brain, your
Mhm.
neurotransmitters, your stress levels, like how you're able to show up and respond to things. Like if you're not able to just take a moment and be alone with your thoughts
Mm.
because you're so constantly having that stimulation and like 24/7, like that's kind of a red flag that maybe it's
Yeah.
time to put those things down, and take a break.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I think there was a time like where I was heightenedly or like more stressed where that was the experience. Also, I think when alcohol is a part of a picture, it's a little bit more predominant.
Yeah.
Um, but I have to say that with meditation and with mantra specifically, that drops me into that quiet space within moments now.
So good.
It's like it's been such a gift because right there is so much information that's available for us. But in our culture, if other people from different countries are listening to this, they're probably not going to be having the same experience at all.
Yeah.
Well, not to the same level. I really feel like America takes the cake when it comes to this kind of hustle culture, unfortunately. But there is really this beautiful capacity that we have to just go in and deeply listen. So having these detox moments for our screen time, and I totally agree with you. Our screen reaction and dependency is wild.
Yeah.
And can be so kind of like, I mean, I'm very guilty of it, especially in certain times. And so when I'm walking, I will be like, get that phone away from me, you
I
know.
know. I know.
But
Yeah.
also um it's very tempting to multitask
Or
and
just
to,
put on one more thing to learn, put on that podcast, which is
yep.
like, sometimes we do that. And then
Mhm.
sometimes it's like, let's walk in silence or walk with a loved one.
Mhm.
It's creating that balance. So we're not always needing that constant stimulation. Because then you're,
Mhm.
you're missing out on like the knowledge and your intuition that can drop in.
Yes.
We're so like really particular about it with the kids
Mhm.
because it's even more of an impact on little ones because their brains are still developing. And I can really see just in, with kids playing with each other, like our kids have 1 hour a week of what
Mhm.
we call like electronic time for
That's
a
amazing.
reason. And I'm like, that's okay. You guys can hate us. And they don't, they get it. We talk about what it does. And my favorite thing ever is when our kids are like, "Can you like turn your computer off? Like, can you turn your phone off?" And I'm like, "Hell yes, I
Mhm.
can. Absolutely." I'm like, "Let's go outside and play." And again, it's like stepping away from that push through, right? I could
Mhm.
easily be like, "I'm just going to do one more thing," and it's like, "No, I can set that aside and we're going to do this now."
Mhm.
But it's really easy now for me to see, other kids in the neighborhood who have like devices 24/7, and they know when they come over to our house, I'm like, this is a device-free zone. If you want to come play here, you guys are going to play like little kids, like go out in the backyard, and they have
Mhm.
the best time. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
there's no phones allowed here. Sorry, you guys are like 7.
It's I'm that needs to be its whole specific podcast about how some of these aspects and sharing it with kids is like a game changer because it's rewriting our neural pathways.
Yeah.
What kids are starting with now, it's just going to be so wild. But I want to make sure that we're getting back to like the guilt and the shame. So we're like in our bucket if we can. Because I know that from like the individuals that I've spoken to this morning, that was a big thing that comes up for them
Yeah,
is
for
that
sure.
whole emotional component of, but I know that we can be on so many different areas. And let's put that on the next podcast because we need like a whole hour to talk about what you're doing with your children because it's incredible.
Well, I think it's the relation is that, we're in this weird generational dead zone, if you will. We're like
Mhm.
xenials. I don't know if you've heard of this term where it's like we're the
Mhm.
elder millennials,
Mhm.
but not quite millennials, but not quite Gen X. We're like we've been toggled in this in between era where we grew up without technology and we grew up with technology.
Mhm.
And what I feel is just that exacerbation and the exponential pushing now with
Mhm.
that technology piece just further brings in that pushing and hustle, right? Because it's like
Mhm.
it's just the stimulation and a further push. So to me, that's kind of where like that thread comes in, where I just see it. It's so palpable now. It's like so obvious now. But I
Mhm.
think for a lot of us, and you, I'm so happy that you did not have the same childhood as so many of us. But a
Mhm.
lot of where this starts, and I see it again, with the way my kids are having a different life experience than I had. We
Mhm.
get it like when we start at school and we're graded, and we get
Mhm.
graded on our knowledge, not our effort.
Mhm.
So you could work your ass off and like still get a really terrible grade because you didn't pick up a concept in time. Like
Mm.
that's where a lot, and maybe it's not school, maybe you had a parent who was very much like pushing you. So it doesn't it yes, it's culture and it stems from
Mhm.
these like early experiences that really sets us up for that shame and guilt of and the
Mm.
feeling of I'm not doing enough, I'm not good enough, I need to do it this way, it has to be this perfect. And I think a lot of women have, that shows up later in life when we can't just like relax, we
Oh
can't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I hear that thread and that, yes, the thread. I mean, it is the thread that generally how we interact with doing enough or being enough or performance has to do with our immediate upbringing, for sure. In that way, it's interesting because even some of the women that I'm working with right now in a group or private capacity, they're all very, very self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
highly self-aware, coaches themselves, leaders of their teams, and they're very introspective and can be immediately reflective of what's occurring for them. And yet it's still not necessarily a natural tendency for them to ask what's nourishing for them.
Mm.
So there's like these kind of different, it's also multidimensional, and multi-layered. And with the aspect of guilt and shame that can come up for some, that really is absolutely like from their upbringing in some capacity or something in the way that they were raised, where it was like there is an attachment to worth based on performance in some way.
Yes.
Yep. But what's interesting about that, even because as you were talking about effort, it's interesting to even be, I'm just having this kind of thought about it. It's interesting to even be acknowledged for effort as well, because effort is subjective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think what, some of the things that I had the gift of experiencing when I was growing up was a couple of parents who really were just black sheep in their family. They were black sheep in their workplaces. My dad was the only straight man. My mom was the only woman in a sea of men, and somehow they found each other.
Yeah.
And so they were really just innately always kind of stepping outside of the box. And as a result, what they provided for me was a continual opportunity to ask me what it was that was going to be right for me.
So
And,
good.
And there's some pendulum swinging that happened in there. Let's just not be like, wow, that's amazing. Everyone should do that. There is absolutely a fine line to walk when you give that opportunity to someone like me.
Because then it's like the pressure of, oh crap, like you gave me the keys to the kingdom, like the ball's in my court, and then you're like, now what?
Oh, it wasn't pressure. I was like, I'm taking this and running with it.
Yeah.
I never, and then they had to pull me back.
Okay.
So it was never pressure. It was like, yes, I got this. See you in a year.
Yeah.
But in the sense of just kind of, it's just, it all comes back to just giving ourselves the opportunity to listen.
Right. And I think what's so just as a total opposite experience that I had, it's like from pretty much like school age, you're told what to do. You're told how to behave. You're told how to feel. You don't get any ownership or freedom in the kind of like traditional structure. So like I remember getting out of high school and I was like, what am I supposed to do? There is no one telling me what to do. What do you mean I can go to like I can apply to all these colleges? Like I don't even know what to do with that information. Like I'm so used to someone dictating my entire life down to like, the whole day schedule and then even homework and all of this stuff. And it's like it keeps you busy. It keeps you busy and checked out. Like I wasn't aware. I wasn't checking in with myself or what's nourishing for me, So I think part of that, again, it really is this massive awakening when you start to ask those questions like, well, how do you feel? How's this working out for you? Is this nourishing for you?
Yeah.
It's beyond eye-opening, and you can really start to look back at like your whole life really and be like, well, how long have I been operating like this?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And what you're talking about is what I feel to be the very base of the issue that people have when they just don't know how to deeply listen.
Yeah.
Like we've been so disconnected with our own inner voice and the magic that is in this divine machine that we have. And I was actually just considering this because it's kind of fascinating. So where our house is we're looking over this neighborhood. And this is a new neighborhood. So what's cool about this is that my office and where I'm sitting at right now, I can see the ebb and flow of the neighborhood, the people that are outside regularly, the people who are running, they're walking their dogs, they're doing this or that, they're outside with their kids, et cetera, et cetera. And you can start to get a feel of the tempo and the cadence of the community, which is really cool, actually.
Yeah.
And my brain just works like this. It just like kind of, I think all of our brains look for algorithms.
Yeah.
And like,
Patterns.
Patterns. And what I'm noticing is that the people who are the happiest from what I've met and the fittest are people that are outside walking or running at least once a day.
Yeah.
And most of these people are doing it twice a day. But even when I talk to them, they are in tune with their body in some way. Like we have these conversations about cold plunging and about CGMs, and like we're having all of these conversations about like, well, what did you notice and how does your body feel with that? And like, what do you think about this skin thing? And like all of these different feedback markers. The individuals who we don't see that come out of their house very often, when I do see them, they're generally just showing inflammation on the body.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a trip to, I'm just thinking about this right now because it's pretty consistent across the board.
Yeah.
And so if we look at that in terms of like coming back to, if you are in this space of a hustle culture and you're feeling like that's a part of it, I think one of the first steps is as you move throughout the day is asking yourself, why am I doing this? Kind of what area of my needs or wants is this feeding? And we've done this exercise, Lisa, in our group where it's like, are we feeding our emotional body, our spiritual body, our social body, our physical body, our mental body, creative body? Like what part of ourselves are we feeding? And are we even aware that we're feeding something like that?
Yeah.
And what purpose is it serving for us at this time? It could be fuel, it could be rest, like whatever that looks like. And then, so what am I feeding and what's the need that I'm servicing right now? And then the next one is like, is this actually nourishing to me? Like, how does it feel? Yeah. And am I connected to how it feels?
Right.
That can be like a very, very easy starting point. And even just keeping like a journal throughout the day and going like, did I like this? What body is it feeling?
Totally. And I'm giggling because I think for most people who are, whether at home or at work, and, you're sitting at maybe you have a 10-hour a day kind of position. Mm-hmm. It's like the thought of, I think it is that push through mentality of like, I just need to go as hard as I can and then get all my work done and finish all my Zoom calls. And then I'll get, and then I'll relax and then I'll have some wine. Then I'll go to the gym and it's like what we're finding, like we're almost like specialty coaches and like how to restructure your schedule, whether at home or the office, for like, you actually can and should take breaks. You will be more productive. Your physical body will be happier. Your mental cognition will be better. And you're not going to, you're like, please tell me, like, who actually operates optimally when you're sitting for 10 hours straight? Like, you're not going to produce your best work. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I even think about like my best work comes in like 90 minutes max. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of like, after that, like, can I push through? I can. Mm-hmm. But you know what's going to work even better than a cup of coffee? If I just go for a walk, I get some sunshine on this pale skin right now. And come right back. And then I have another 90-minute block that I just crush it. And I think that's a hard concept for people. It's like, it's bringing it back to this moderation instead of push all the way, like slam on the gas and just like bear it and like get to the end. And it's like, yes, we have to do that sometimes. And the more we can integrate this moderation and these breaks and these little nourishment, they're like little snack packs of nourishment. Like food or sunshine or walking, like it does make a difference. And we're evidence that when you take care of this, you will be able to show up better and do your, the work that needs to be done,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. You reminded me of a story that I thought was so appropriate. And so I want to share it because if anyone else is out there and they're like, oh yeah, that's me. So it was a client, and we were talking about, we had worked with each other for an extended period of time, and we were talking about her performance. And she was like, I just don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I can't, like, I have no energy in the afternoon. And I kind of asked her like what her day looked like. And she was like, I'm just on back-to-back meetings. And then like the afternoon comes and and she started taking Adderall for it. And so then I talked to her and I was like, yo, we're not meant to like be at high capacity for 8 hours at a time. Like
Right.
no one does well in that kind of setting, except maybe Tony Robbins and some of these pretty incredible group facilitators. Cause I have to say, I've seen some people where I'm like, I don't know where your fourth and fifth engine is, because that's absolutely incredible. So, but they're also standing up and they're like being dynamic, and there's like this whole vibe and charge that they're getting. They're not sitting in front of a screen. They're not in a seated position. They're
Yes.
not just like in, the blue light rooms without any windows or, so there's things to consider. But I thought that that was one of the best examples of just assuming that we're supposed to be operating at a certain capacity in terms of performance. And if we're not, then we're either thinking there's something wrong with me as an individual. And then what do I have to do to basically pretend like I can perform with the rest of the culture? And, ugh. And then we can break it down into human design.
Oh, yes.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, so if you guys aren't in the human design conversation yet, I would just give yourself a little quick look up, because understanding your human design also helps you to understand how your energy moves throughout the day. And, I think it's so lucky, Elise, that you and I are generators, because
Yes. Yes.
I think that we might, although everyone is really beautiful and I love them all, but I also really just appreciate that both of us are generating the vibe
Yes.
throughout.
I was talking with my sister-in-law yesterday, and she's starting her own company, and we had a lovely chat, and I was just sharing with her like one of the benefits of you and I like partnering together is, well, not only this like beautiful space we can hold for this more like safe container and experience as, in a business, right? But also that I'm like, I've never met anyone who like had the same work ethic as me. Like I was always the pusher, like, and always the one who was like doing the most. And I've just never met anyone who like matched that. But then we had like different skill sets, and we just had a good laugh about it. I'm like, well, it was just really meant to be. But yeah, it's like everyone has their special roles and special superpowers, and really learning to like, again, it's the same thing with hormones.
Mhm.
Whether it's your energy type, it's like working with, and like, when you're, to some extent when you're doing the opposite of what your body wants to do,
Mhm.
it's like,
Yeah.
to some extent,
Yeah. Absolutely.
even if there's like zero awareness, you're going to feel a little bit of a rub. Like this is just not jiving,
Oh, yeah. And how many people, like, well, Lise, and also whoever is listening, raise your internal hand. If you have been pushing yourself too far or too hard and too fast, and you've gotten in a car accident, or you've slipped on something, or you have cut your finger, or it's like your environment will basically also just give you these little nudges to slow down.
Yes.
So even if it's not an internal signal, like if you're really ignoring those internal signals, just wait.
Yes.
And it's possible that you'll get even bigger signals from the outside.
It's so true. It's like, just wait, the universe will get louder and the response will be bigger till you listen. Yeah.
Yes. I love there's that meme that says like someone has a sign up going like, universe, can you give me like a signier sign? Like a bigger,
Hit me over the head. Yeah.
yeah, like a bigger sign that I need to change something.
Yeah.
Lisa, I know you have this experience too, but I think probably like the most obvious one I had was where I was on a Zoom call with you and someone, and Nancy, one of our coach whisperer. And we had Instacart coming. I was in back-to-back calls. I had socks on, and I'm just holding the computer on Zoom, having this meeting, not even being like, hey, I'm going to go grab something. I'm just continuing to talk while I'm walking down the stairs to get Instacart at the door, and I just slip. And I go down the entire set of stairs and I land and the computer closes shut. I don't know if it's going to ever work again. And I'm laying down in the fetal position on the floor. And I'm like, okay.
We can laugh now, but it was horrible. Yeah.
We can laugh now. And Rafa came running up the stairs and he thought that I had maybe like broken something, which I didn't. But I laid in bed for like an hour and I was like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was a big one. I learned to wear shoes.
Yeah.
And
And we cut your call schedule in half, I think. Like, what where do we need to take off your plate? Like literally, what needs to come off right now? That was
yes.
such a strange time because I had a fall. Like we had a fall within like a day or two. Like I had a gnarly ass fall during a run. And I was like pushing through. I'm gonna like do hard things every day, like as if I'm not doing enough freaking hard things, just like running a business, being a mom and taking care of myself and blah blah. I'm like, no, I'm gonna add running on top of this. I hate running and I'm gonna like force myself and it's gonna be this hard thing. Like I was watching a lot of David Goggins videos. And again, now I'm laughing. I'm like, David Goggins is great for men. He's very like that's the masculine energy that works really well. Here I am listening to David Goggins and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go do hard things. And oh my gosh. And then my body was like, I hate you. And now you're going to trip and fall on your own 2 feet. And I have the picture, Shan, where like right after the fall and I'm so beat up, I am so swollen. Like you can see the inflammation from the fall, but then you can also see the whole, it's like full body inflammation, like peak cortisol, just as high as any other time in my life. And I will always save that picture because it's just a reminder, anytime I need to just kind of look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. It manifests in the body. And that was like the big knocking on the door for both of us of like, hey,
yeah,
you might want to just scale it back just a bit.
absolutely. Thank you for bringing up David Goggins.
Yeah.
Because I think that is such a great example. And it's not to say that we don't want to, like try new things and to push ourselves to be outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, that's one thing. But it's another thing when you are doing it to the place where it's like you're walking off a ledge.
Yes.
And you don't know why you're walking off, like you think you know why, but you're not really sure why. Because I think that is a really beautiful example of the extreme version of the pendulum swing. And I've seen both men and women suffer from that kind of mentality. It's just not balanced.
No.
And I can't really think of anyone. I'm trying to think of someone that I know in my life or even in history, but really I'm always skeptical about history books because I think that there's always a skewed, perspective because it's a recount from someone's perspective that's no longer alive. Right. Anyways, so when I think of someone like in my life right now, anyone that I think has pushed to the max and just kept doing the max capacity of anything, it hasn't worked out for them.
No.
It's never been like, wow. Even when you look at like certain celebrities that are, or performers, and we're getting on so many tangents now, but
okay. Let her rip.
Yeah. Like Taylor Swift, for example, I hear about like her training program. Actually, Rafa shared it with me. And then he said on one day, she just doesn't get out of bed. And I was like, that's actually probably a really great idea.
Yeah.
Because if she didn't do that, she would not be able to operate.
Yes.
And I just imagine some of like, even, some of these performers who went to drugs to enable them to operate at a high capacity, because there's just no way that they could function without a support of some sort.
Yeah.
So I think the problem with, well, I would imagine that David Goggins is a very unique human on this planet. And what he's been through in his life is going to be incredibly specific to him. But I think that's another thing that we have an issue with sometimes, is comparing ourselves to others and thinking that we need to be doing what someone else is doing. Whereas, as you and I were talking about last night, Lise, we can look at all of this different information that is available for us and then go, does that resonate for me?
Exactly. Because I'll still call in David Goggins. Like, the difference I can sense now, because I have been in this awareness conversation and been really listening to my body, so I can tell the difference now between, like, a soft resistance of like, meh, I don't want to train today, or I don't want to work out,
Mm,
versus like my body being like, oh, hell no, like this is a
mhm.
rest day.
Yeah.
So on the meh days, then I'm checking in. Did I eat enough? Am I fueling properly? Did I sleep enough? Am
Yeah.
I just being meh because, it's to be totally honest, like, I don't always want to brush my teeth or do these like self-care practices. I'm like, I would love to just like, be George Jetson and like run, like that was like my dream when I was a little kid. I wanted to be George Jetson and like move through the little runway where the robots would like do all the self-care stuff for him. Like,
Yes.
they showered for him, they brushed his teeth. I was like, oh, that's amazing. The future looks bright. But then those are the moments when I'm like, all right, I can do this. I'm gonna give it a good 10 minutes. And if my body's like, no, I'm gonna honor that and listen to my body.
Mm,
And 9.9 times out of 10, I just need to go for a walk, and that's enough. And then I'm warmed
mhm.
up and I'm in that transition state, and it's fine. So it's like, to your point, Shan, like taking those, what resonates in when you need it in those moments, like take that, but again, it's I think of overall, it's like, instead of just like blindly pushing through everything, it's really coming back to that awareness and that sensitivity, and that it can change. Like, it can be
Mm,
different. It doesn't have to be this like extreme all or nothing 24/7.
exactly. And I think that's really comes down to like the tools that are available for us, which is like, first of all, understanding like the basics,
Hmm.
whether it's the basics of nutrition, the basics of training, the basics of finance, the basics of communication, the basics of planting a garden, like whatever that looks like. And then also going into, well, what actually what feels like it's resonant, what feels like it would probably be the best action for either how I feel or what this thing is asking for. For example, we are planting some plants in our yard.
Yeah.
And we got about 3 different types of plants. I planted some, 2 of them, amazing. They love their life. They love their new planter. They're so stoked. And they say hi to us every morning, like they're good. And then these other ones, I was like, man, they are so sad. These plants are so sad. And they all were planted at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I looked at them, and they're these beautiful, like purple sage. You would love them.
I know. I'm sorry, purple.
And I was looking at them and I was like, okay, what do you guys need? Like, are you getting enough sun? Is this enough water? And then I kind of looked around, and the soil that I had put there had just sunken down a little bit. So the top of their roots were exposed.
Oh.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to cover those up with more dirt and then put a little bit more, fertilizer on you. And then we're going to see what happens. And I did that. And the next day they were like alive again.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so I think that's just like a little baby example of like, maybe you don't have to do it right, but maybe kind of like drop in and go, well, what sounds like if I were that plant, what would I want is what I
Yeah.
was asking
Yeah.
myself. You're like, I might be a little cold. Like, how does this work? Maybe I'm more hungry. And that's been a really interesting thing as well, because plants really just it will show you an immediate expression almost of whether they like something or not, and then they'll adapt to the new environment. And we have that same capacity.
Right. It's like, you're spot on. Do we have those tools to even have that conversation with ourselves? And again,
Mhm.
like if you're like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I do not have these conversations with myself. Like that's what we help
Mhm.
with. And
Yep.
it's in a really interesting way. It's almost like learning how to reparent yourself and kind of learn those check-in tools that a lot of us might not necessarily have had. And just like as I think about with my kids sometimes, especially when they were younger,
Mhm.
at night, if they kind of miss that bedtime window, and same
Mhm.
for adults, actually, same thing. When you miss that like sweet spot with bedtime, and then all of a sudden you're like, emotional.
Mm.
This shows up really clearly when my kids were really little. They would get emotional and then say, I'm hungry, I need a snack. And then, we're working with them to be like, okay, well, are you actually hungry? Or, check in, like, how does your belly feel? Are you getting those like
Mhm.
those signals of like your empty tummy?
Mhm.
Or are you just tired? I'm
Mhm.
not tired. Asleep 2 minutes later, right? And so then we'll remind them the next day, when we get to bed way earlier, and we're like, remember that feeling when you thought you were hungry, but you actually fell asleep within 2 seconds? So like sometimes when we miss that like bedtime window of self-care, like it can show up like this, and then those are those awareness practices and those tools that, you know, not everybody gets, but hopefully at some point in your life you have that experience either through your own self-awareness and kind of self-healing, or working with someone to help you like find that awareness and check back in with your body.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, you're so right on. It is reparenting. And just learning how to reparent or ask those questions in one area gives us the opportunity to ask it in so many other areas. And I think most individuals who come in and they're like, oh, I don't have those signals. Like my body doesn't give me those. But then they'll say in the same breath or the same paragraph, oh, but I crave sugar, at night. And I was like, well, where does that signal come from? And you're like, okay, what's the expectation of what signals sound like? Or,
Oh, that's so good.
I know. And I find that to be very common
Yeah.
that people will identify that they don't get signals, but
Mm.
then they will, talk about like their energy levels or what their cravings look like, or, that they have a hard time waking up in the morning. And like those are all signals.
Those are signals. So it's like almost like putting a language to like giving them the tools to just even like check in and speak about it. Like what is oh, that's so good. I mean, that's what so much work is done with children now, is like, okay, what does that emotion feel like in your body? Or what does this like
Mm,
physiological state feel like? That was the I spent all of 2020 and 2021 reparenting myself with
mm,
emotions and then connecting it to my physical body. I
mm.
never did that before. It's like,
Interesting.
what does anger feel like? Ooh, it feels hot. It feels red.
Mm,
It feels yeah, hot. It feels like I want to go move my body, you know?
yeah.
Um, so it's yeah, oh, that's so fascinating, Shannon. Like, do we even have the language and the connection to like bridge that if we're getting those signals, but we don't even realize it?
Yes,
Wow,
absolutely. And
fascinating.
I will say that this was a very interesting experience, but it might apply to some people. When we went to Burning Man 2 years ago, like Rafa and myself are very different in this way. He is the king of push through, or he was the king of push through. As a Marine, that was what he had to do. It was a necessity. And so at Burning Man, which was the first time that we had been together, I have an idea of maybe I'm like a little bit of a princess now. I wasn't a princess when I first went, but thanks.
You're not. You're not.
Okay.
Go
So,
ahead. I know. I
okay.
think I know.
Yeah. So it was getting to this point towards the end. And to be honest, like my body just shuts down. When I need sleep, it's like I have 15 minutes and I need to get the F out of there, or else I'm going to be just not a fun person. And I just don't enjoy really. I'm just not enjoying myself. Like I'm tired. I want to let my body go to bed.
Yeah.
So I had my whole setup to go to bed, which was earplugs, sound canceling headphones, an eye mask, just all of these things. I like put tape on the seams in the van we were sleeping in, et cetera, et cetera. And Rafa would come back at like 6 or 7 in the morning and I would call it at 1. Anyways, but he just kept pushing through. And on day 5, it was this massive desert storm and our tent blew over, like all of this stuff. And I was just coming into my cycle. And I just remember sitting in the front of the van and going, I can't be here another moment.
Yeah.
Like, this is not enjoyable, fun. Like, it's not worth it to me. It's not a David Goggins moment where it's like, you can go through this. But it was for him at that time. He got, maybe it was a dopamine hit from pushing through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was something where there's also this element. And since then, we've had many conversations about it where I was like, you don't actually have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, and this is just an example. Of course, there's so much to share about like kind of the unfolding that happened from that experience for another time. But I think it just points to, if you are used to pushing through, and just to acknowledge that if you are used to doing that, it probably served you for a very, very good reason at some point in your life. And if you've had pride that's associated with it, it's probably very like earned that you have that. Because I know some people have had to persevere regardless of the situation. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be alive. And so there's like this extra gear that comes in for us in our survival mechanism. It's there for a reason. But then we sometimes apply it where it's not necessary. And that's really where we get into a sticky situation. And specifically for women, and we can move this into a different conversation. And if you guys want to know more, book a discovery call with us.
Yes.
Because the cortisol, the chronic cortisol experience that's occurring for women, that's different than how it occurs for men, is and from what I'm seeing, kind of like the biggest factor that women don't even know that they are experiencing it.
No.
It's like, I want to take some women, and you and I have talked about it and just been like, we're just going to remove you from your life for a week and give you a spa day and like put your feet in the sand and tell you to swim in the ocean and put puppies around you and have food cooked for you, and then put you back in your life and see what you want to change.
And they'll probably lose like 10 pounds in a week.
Yeah.
Just what, it's like, oh my God, that's going to be the next Green Door Life retreat. Puppies and ocean and massages. And
I know. I was like, we have our schedule. Our work here is done.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, it's so true. It's so true. And then it's, sometimes when you're in the thick of it and you're in that push mode, you need a long runway of recovery.
Yes.
But I think what you and I are shining examples of is that you can find that middle ground again, where yes, you and I have both been to that extreme of pushing our bodies with exercise, with work, with diets, everything, right? But and there is that healing recovery time required. And now we're in this beautiful space where I feel like we're able to flow more of, respecting our physical bodies, leaning into that rest without fear, right? Yeah. Leaning into, like, I took a deload week, from training. And was it mentally hard? Of course it was. I love moving my body. So I just like walked a lot, it's about being able to slow down without fear now. Even with work, like that's also been a trip, owning your own business when you're kind of like, ooh, you could always be doing more. It's like having another child. So it's like, I could always be like, putting my attention there, but it's also reminding ourselves that we can and should, pull back. And, it's that space between that's just as important. It's the rest that's just as important.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think the comment or the thought process that's been coming in so regularly, it just keeps dropping in throughout this conversation, is that thought that only when we're empty can we be filled by something.
Yeah.
And so we have to fully allow our bodies to rest in order to truly like take in something new.
Yeah.
And if we're just operating from like that half empty place all the time, we're never going to experience what it means to either be fully filled or fully depleted, and like kind of go through that full cycle. It's just like running on this hamster wheel that doesn't allow for either experience to be felt fully. And I think that's really, really, really powerful. And I think it's something that you and I get to work on daily.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's a journey that's ever really over either.
No.
And that's kind of the fun part, to be honest. Like if it was super fast and easy, there would be no discovery of self in the process. And that's kind of what this thing is about.
Yes.
So I think that our new name, as you kind of coined it earlier, might be awareness facilitators.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Reparenting coaches, awareness facilitators. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're brewing up new names for what it is that we do in this wild journey of the Green Door life.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do we feel like we've kind of round out a lot of topics here?
I think we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have too. So for those of you who are listening either now or in the future, if this is you, we'd love to hear if this resonated for you. Like if you really resonate with, yes, this is me, I'm experiencing this in myself, and you have either thoughts you want to share or you're looking for support in this area, please reach out to us. Go to thegreendoorlife.com backslash experience.
All I'm picturing is like backslash subway tile.
Yeah,
in the kitchen.
totally. Wow. Okay. And you can book a call with us there. It's free. And yeah, it's a wild rodeo out there. So for all of you, I hope you guys got some food for thought from this call. And Lisa, it was super fun to go through and dive into this topic with you.
Always, always. I love the storytelling, as you know.
Yes. So good. All right. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys next time.